Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You had to defy me right from the start, didn't you? All right. Let's go ahead and get started. And welcome everyone to this regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, February 6th, 2012. It's now 10 minutes after 2. I'm Paul Krikorian, the new chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. I'm joined by my colleagues, the Honorable Bill Rosendahl and the Honorable Mitch Englander. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'm looking very much forward to working with both of you as we continue to carry the baton of fiscal restraint that Bernard Parks established in this committee for so many years. I think we all know that we're far from where we need to be as a city. We have many years probably of difficulties still ahead of us. But I think it's safe to say that the city would probably be significantly worse off were it not for the leadership that Bernard Parks has demonstrated as chair of this committee for so many years. And I think all Angelenos owe him a deep debt of gratitude, and his staff and all the others who've contributed to the work of this committee over the last 8 years, because we would be in a more difficult situation as a city but for that leadership. And I for one, appreciate it very much. I feel a little bit like, for the UCLA fans in the room, I feel a little bit like Gene Bartow following Coach Wooden, but I'll do the best that I can, and hopefully my duration might be a little bit longer than Gene Bartow's. We'll see. So with that, we're ready to dive into the agenda. But if either of my comments wanted to make any introductory comments, that's fine. Okay. If not, we'll be taking general public comment at the conclusion of the meeting of the agenda. So if anybody would like to offer public comment, please fill out a speaker card and bring it forward. And colleagues, if I may, I'd like to take a number of items out of order and vote on them collectively as consent items. And we are joined also by the Honorable Paul Koretz. Mr. Koretz, welcome. So items 8 through 23, I'd like to take collectively with the following exceptions: numbers 19, 20, 21, and 22, and 16. So that leaves us items 8 through 15, numbers 17 and 18, and number 23. I would like to take all those items, absent objection, as a single consent item. So if anybody has any objections, seeing no objections, I'd like to move those forward to council with the recommendation that the Department of Finance check with each affected council office prior to the vote in full council, so that the council member of the relevant district is informed about these liens. And with that addition, I'd, seeing no objection, advance those matters to council. And that will be the recommendation of this committee. That brings us to items 19, 20, 21, and 22. It's my understanding that those matters have been dealt with, and so we can receive and file those matters absent objection. Seeing none, that will be the recommendation of this committee. Also, item 16, Finance has requested that that item be continued. Do we have a date certain that we would like it to be continued to? Can anybody speak to that? If not, we'll just hold that. We'll continue that matter for now, and then we'll re-agendize that.
What we can do is... Oh,
go right ahead. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, Roy Morales with the CLA's office. The Office of Finance actually had requested item 23 be received and filed, and as much as the issues were resolved, they actually rejected this request for a waiver because they applied their new change of policy. So all the issues in item 23 have been resolved as far as the Office of Finance is concerned.
Okay, so then just so that we're clear on all of these items, yes, before you leave. So 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23 should be received and filed.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Item 26, I'm sorry, item 16 should be continued?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, and all of the other remaining items, 8 through 20, 8 through...
8 through 18, with the exception of 16.
Yes.
Are ready to move forward.
You're prepared to move forward on
Yes,
those?
sir.
All right, well, if I can just then, without objection, amend the previous consent agenda item to that effect.
So
Okay.
moved.
All right, thank you very much. All right.
So that would take us back to items 1 through 4, which are closed session items. Would you wish to hold those or take those items up now?
I think I'd like to take those matters first. We do have a lot of folks here, so I think rather than clearing the room, why don't we retire into closed session to consider the closed session matters? Your patience, Mr. Santana, thank you.
All right, the next item is item 5, which is the CEO report relative to the potential budget impact of fiscal year 2012-13 pension contribution rates and a 5-year projection of city contributions to the Los Angeles City Retirement System.
All right, Mr. Santana, welcome.
Good afternoon, Miguel Santana, CAO. We submitted a few weeks ago an update, which is good news for a change to be able to report on progress being made regarding in our pension system. A year ago, we had reported that we anticipated an increase in our pension contribution of approximately $948 million. Not the increase, but the total bill was expected to be that. As a result of a number of factors that I'll go into, our anticipated pension payment for next year will be $858 million, which is a 9.5 reduction of what we anticipated. There's a number of reasons for that. A significant factor is the fact that we received our lasers and both pension boards. We had a 21% market value in investments last year. The stock market did extremely well, and if you just recall, the way they the number that they use, or the return that they use, is based on the fiscal year. So everything that happened prior to July 1st would be determined in the next year's bill. So the stock market hasn't done as well after July 1st and up until recently. And so what has happened over the last several months is not counted in next year's bill. It'll be counted in the following year. So we're always sort of 1 year behind. And so the 21% investment return was significant and played a major role. But other factors really resulted as a result of work that you've done as a committee as well as the council and the mayor, specifically the contribution towards retiree health care. That has made a significant impact in our overall liability. Both, if you recall, most civilians are currently contributing 4% of their salaries for retiree health care. That went from 0, and so that's a sizable, and 65% of the sworn have made a decision to contribute 2% of their salary. So on both systems, the majority of our employees are contributing about 11%. For those who chose not to make that contribution, the city, through your action, has opted to freeze the benefit at the existing level. So both the contribution as well as the freezing of that benefit is what gets evaluated over an extended period of time, and that's part of the analysis the actuary does. In addition to that, at the request of your council, we have argued that changes in the return, investment return assumption, which the fire and police system had opted to be phased in over a 5-year period, that allows us a transition time, and that has allowed for this part of the result of this positive news. The challenge is, so the bottom line is, about 2 months ago we had projected our deficit to be somewhere between 200 and 250 million for fiscal year 13-14. We're now expecting the 12-13, I apologize. Now we're expecting that deficit to be between 150 and 200 million. So it's moving in the right direction, which is the good news. The challenge is that we still have a sizable amount to go through. And I think it's important to acknowledge the progress that we're making, and also to recognize that the challenge ahead of us will continue to be difficult, but certainly could be inspired by what positive news we've achieved. We still have some looming clouds out there. The biggest one is that we know of is the ad loan case, which this committee has been briefed on a number of times. That is hopefully going to side in the city's favor, but it's not. But it's something we have to be mindful of, and we anticipate the outcome of that to be sometime in the next 15 months. The council is having a discussion about the business tax. The elimination of the business tax will obviously create about a $430 to $40 million hole in our budget. And then, of course, our recovery continues to be a slow one. While things are looking better, we had projected about a 2% growth in revenue, and we're pretty much on target on that projection. I mean, 2% is fairly lackluster, and that's pretty much what we're seeing in the revenue projection so far. The drop in unemployment rate on a national level and at the state level is certainly helping. We're seeing some of that here, but it's not clearly moving as quickly as we would like. We did make a request of both pension systems to do a 5-year forecast. This is only an illustration. Of course, every year the number changes based on the revenue return assumptions, any changes that we adopt, including COLAs, any changes we adopt for pensions, that sort of thing. But if you look in the report, we gave 3 various possible outcomes. If we had originally proposed about a year ago that our pension costs for example, for year 13-14 would be 450 million. This is on the laser side. For 14-15 would be 500 million, and for 15-16 would be 534 million. And then 550 for 16-17. There are 2 potential scenarios, one where there's 0 growth in investment return, which is pretty much the track that we've been seeing so far over the last 6 months, although things are starting to pick up on the stock market end. And then if there were to be a growth of what is in the actuary assumption of 7.75%. And so in both cases, the good news is that the numbers are significantly less than what was projected a year ago, from 450 in year 13-14 to now, under the worst case scenario, of 386, from 500 million to in 14-15 to about 420, and so on. So this is the structural part of the solution that we're seeing. But again, the reason why this is in our report is a reminder that we are still somewhat vulnerable to the changes in the stock market. And so what we want to eventually be at is at a place that the savings that we generate could be relied on an ongoing basis and not just exclusively based on progress being made in the stock market. We have requested that a similar analysis be done for the fire and police pension system. They're currently working on that. We're hoping to have that within this month. and then we will provide sort of a combined projection for the next 5 years in our mid-year report that will be issued sometime in mid-March. So this is a report, there's no action being asked. This is just to simply keep you informed, both on the good news, but again, on the challenges that still lie.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, on the 90 million on the good news side, does that include assumptions that our efforts to halt the increases in health care, that the lawsuits against that prevail?
It does assume that, well, first, there hasn't been a lawsuit on the retiree health care issue at this time, but we're expecting, we wouldn't be surprised if that in fact does happen.
We're expecting that to happen.
Yes, yes, we are assuming that we are successful in, and should we face any legal challenge regarding freezing the retiree health care benefit. The one thing that's important to note that that as part of the agreements that we've established with those bargaining units who are contributing is that they themselves wouldn't file a lawsuit against the city. We haven't reached an agreement with all bargaining units. We still have two major ones, both EAA as well as the city attorneys, where we're still, who have not agreed to make that contribution, but most other civilian and sworn bargaining units have.
Do we have a sense of how much that would eat up of the 90 million if that were overturned?
No, but we could get back to you on that. The report doesn't break it down that way, but we could certainly try to calculate that.
But we're pretty optimistic that we would prevail ultimately.
We are very optimistic. We believe that different from your pension, that your retiree health care benefit is not a vested benefit, that the city has a right to make changes to it. And we actually, within that framework, chose, not for legal reasons, but for policy reasons, to freeze it at the existing level. The city could have opted to eliminate it altogether. And so there is still a benefit that those who choose not to make that contribution will receive. It would just simply be the level that's being made in 2011.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Furlough days, 4 are being taken by many of us. Does that continue to be a practice for the rest of the year with EA and with the city attorneys, or is there any discussion of those realities with them?
Well, with the city attorneys, since they did not support 2 agreements, the only way the city could generate savings to mitigate the shortfall in the city attorney's office was through furloughs. With everyone else, we were able to come up with an alternative, and so we were able to reduce the furlough program to only 4 days. And the majority of those employees took it during the holiday period to minimize the impact on services. So those agreements where bargaining units agreed, that program will continue next year. We're currently debating how to proceed with the budget and the throughout the city, and we're working with the mayor's office on that. It's important to note that the city attorneys in particular, they also received a raise as a result of not reaching an agreement, and so that has a budgetary impact, and they're expected to receive another raise next year, and that's part of what we were hoping to negotiate. So to the extent that an agreement isn't reached, then it's going to be hard to mitigate the shortfall within the city attorney's office without doing another furlough program or making the equivalent number, which is approximately $9 million in cuts.
How many hours are they taking in furloughs? I mean, I'm curious. I hear a lot of complaints about not getting this done or doing
It's
this.
30, I think the city attorney, 36 hours? Yes.
Days.
36 days, I apologize.
36 days.
Yes.
The $500 million roughly you mentioned that would be business-friendly loss of revenue. Is that a serious policy discussion going on? Those $500 million, sort of how you viewed that?
Well, the status of it now is that your committee directed us to initiate a study We just hired our economist to do that analysis, to look at how we could phase out the business tax in a way that minimizes the impact on the city's purse. And so that's going to take approximately 2 or 3 months to complete. So we'll be back at your committee sometime late spring with that report.
And I hope in that report they point out, if it's true, that by reducing it X months later or X years later, we're going to generate more revenue.
Well,
They got to make it clear enough that it's worth it, not just a play game and we lose half a billion.
We've hired outside economists that will determine that. I think it'll be hard to find anyone who could provide a guarantee that if you eliminate $100 million, you're going to get another $100 million back. I think, so there's really two questions. The first question is on a policy level. It doesn't make sense to have the gross receipts tax. Doesn't make sense to have it in this way. Can we, like we budget everything else, make a decision not to reduce it down and start responding to that accordingly from a budgetary standpoint? And in some cases, you could argue that it's worth it if, in fact, it builds the economy. And now, whether it guarantees that growth in revenue is a whole other matter. But it's a policy discussion that your council will have to have.
Okay, I just hope within that discussion, basic services, which are already being impacted right now,
Right.
It would not, in my opinion, be proper to, again, impact services that taxpayers pay and expect to get from us as a incentive or pie in the sky kind of concept going forward, because we have the real financial problems today, and we have to balance our budget. So I just hope whoever that is, that they look at it from that end, because all I've heard all my life is more business friendly, more business friendly. Small towns have a way of playing it a lot differently than the big city does, but on the other hand, our basic services is what I want to obviously protect and make sure.
Right.
Thank you. Mr. England? A couple of technical questions, I guess. The report talks about the steps that LACERS and LAFPP have taken to reduce their retirement-related costs, and you mentioned changing the asset smoothing method and the manner in which extraordinary losses or gains in the market value of assets are recognized. Can you talk a little bit more about how those two steps work?
I think their goal was, and there were representatives here, and I think they had to step out, but I think the goal that they were trying to do is minimize sort of the huge swings that occur with the market, and by assuming a longer period of time, then they're able to make sure that we're not as vulnerable to the enormous swings that we experienced during, the last time when we saw the huge downturn in the economy. And so, from our standpoint, it was a smart thing to do. It also means that when we see huge gains in the stock market, we're also not going to experience an enormous lift. So,
which is also a good thing from the general fund's perspective, because then we resist the temptation of saying, okay, we got a vacation. So.
It forces some discipline. I mean, it creates an automatic discipline on our side. So, it's hopefully over a period of time, we're able to have greater predictability in our pensions plans and not be as vulnerable. There is some of that, as you can see here. It was hard to disdain exactly how much of it of the decrease in anticipated contribution is as a result of the changes we made. What percentage of it was as a result of changes they made? It was a combination of all those things that the actuary looks at and comes back with one final number.
How does our investment return assumption and our assumptions about the liability for future health care costs, how do our assumptions compare to the assumptions that are relied upon by other big cities? Is there consistency in those throughout the country, or is there wide variation?
Well, I think you'll find that most big cities and pension systems are reviewing their assumptions and are pushing them down. Where
What
the
investment return?
Yeah, investment return assumptions, where the 7.75, it's within sort of the median, I think, of where most systems are. Some of them are 7.5 or some of them are 8. It's rare to find anybody being higher than 8 anymore. So what our argument wasn't necessarily against reducing the assumption, because, I think it's within sort of responsible management and forecasting to have it in that neighborhood between 7.75 and 7.5. It was really allowing us time to get there, because that change in assumption makes a dramatic difference in what we end up having to pay. And so we did ask, in the case of the fire and police system, that they give us 5 years for a transition, and we're fortunate that the board responded favorably to that and agreed. But ultimately, I think it was within sort of smart practices to have it at that level.
All right. Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, just a little bit more on business license tax. We've generally been talking about just getting rid of it and transitioning it. Number one, I agree with Mr. Rosendahl. I think we have to be careful in doing that right now while the city's kind of broke, and wait till we're in a little bit better financial position. But I'd like to see us approach it in a more targeted way. For instance, I don't know if just the best example I can think of, companies that are doing oil drilling in Los Angeles. I don't know if they pay a business license tax or not, but if they did, I think they would not be a good choice to include, because they're there, they're not going anywhere. It's not like they can just say, oh, I'll drill for oil in Palos Verdes instead. They're an operation that is not going to be deterred by paying a modest business license tax. At the same time, what we did with auto dealerships, I think, made some good targeted sense, because the sales tax they bring in is so much greater, that I think continuing to allow us to lose them as opposed to going out and marketing ourselves and trying to gain new ones, I think that made a lot of sense. So I think, from my perspective, one, we should be looking at industries we want to target and where we think we actually will wind up with a net gain by making those changes. And also, on a broader level, not whether we want to completely eliminate business license tax, but whether there's some way to do it other than gross receipts, which I think hits people harder that do a lot of business with very low margins, whether there's an alternative to that while maintaining a business license tax. So from my perspective, those are a couple things to look at.
In the report that we presented, we did outline some alternative options, and I think specifically looking at a different method was one of them. And we did ask our economists to start examining that as a potential. And so we'll be mindful of these two other areas that you talked about and make sure that our final report speaks to them.
And also a last point on that, it may also be wise to compare the choices between completely eliminating it for a segment and just being more competitive and charging less than other cities. I know from my experience in West Hollywood, we looked at completely keeping no business license tax, and ultimately the city decided just to be lower than everybody else at the time. So there was some revenue generated, but it was still, a competitive advantage, which might be something we look at for some segments as well.
Right. So, colleagues, we're going to have an opportunity to discuss the details of the substantive policy on business tax when that report comes back for further consideration. But, Mr. Rosendahl, you had one.
Yeah, I like what both of the gentlemen have just said. I really believe in a revenue day concept of more revenue generating. And there are angles and things we could look at. And I'd like to get our act together early enough so we can definitely make the November ballot, if in fact we want to do something. It is the perfect opportunity for it, because if it's something that can appeal on various levels to various majority of people's, or whatever the percentage we have to get, I would like to have a benchmark when we need to submit it. I'd also like to know options that we can think of, thinking out of the box, that obviously we would have to be sensitive to, but might be revenue-generating opportunities. Whatever we need to do to get a mix of them and options on that,
Got it.
and early enough so we could deal with a November ballot.
We'll work with the chair to put that together.
All right, thank you. We're going to receive and file the report. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for that report and for the bit of good news.
Yes.
Cautiously optimistic good news, tentative good news.
Lovely.
We'll take it where we can find it.
50 million less in the deficit than we started.
That's right. All right, that brings us to item number 6.
Item number 6, Office of Finance report relative to the achievement of $563,468.22 from the unclaimed money seized incidental to a rest fund to the city's general fund.
Hello, Jan
Good afternoon.
Zatorsky, Assistant Director, Office of Finance. As indicated in our report, we have a request from the Los Angeles Police Department to escheat $563,000, which are unclaimed monies seized incidental to the arrest trust fund. And this is in accordance with state law and the city's own ordinance. And after notice of publication, after a 3-year period, if funds remain, the department can ask to have those funds escheated and moved to the general fund. So it's basically good news. It's revenue moving into the general fund.
That's always good news. Mr. England.
I just have really one very quick question on it. So it's every 3 years, but this says we're going back to August 10th of 1981. Why did we wait so long?
This is something that we received from the police department. They continuously monitor their funds, and
Well, the police department's here. Maybe they can address that as well. Thank you.
Hi, Laura Luna, Commanding Officer, Fiscal Operations Division. There is about $3,000 or so that goes back to 1981. What's happened is we've done a major review of all the money that's been sitting, and as part of our scrubbing our special accounts. And this requires that the detectives go back and check off some of the items that are either in our safe because they were being held as evidence, physical evidence, which is most of this money that's very old. And now the system automatically moves money because we've changed the programming for the system so that after 2 years, the money automatically goes into the trust fund so it can be ready to be escheated to the general fund. So it's been a positive for the city to move money quickly through the process.
So the detectives, this could be tied to open cases and things pending, things like that, you mean?
It could be, yeah.
Until those are closed off?
Yeah.
They actually went back physically to go through, making sure all these things were closed off?
Right. They're sent an audit report, and they're supposed to basically dispose of the item one way or another, give us some indication. So at one point, there was some money sitting in the safe that was being held as physical evidence, and it's been old money. And some of it is like 5 cents, 20 cents, $3.
A lot of work.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Okay,
So-
thank you very much. No, that's great. If you could compliment all those who put all that information together. It sounds like it was a tremendous amount of work, much more so than what just appears on a couple pieces of paper.
Oh, yeah,
So,
yeah. It doesn't
that's
tell the
great.
whole story.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz, did you have something?
No.
Mr. Rosendahl? Okay. All right. Well, then, I would move that we approve the Office of Finance's recommendations
Thank you.
and accept the escheatment. Without objection, that'll be the action of this committee, and that brings us to the final item, number 7.
7, yes. This is a Los Angeles Convention Center report relative to requesting approval of a refund due to General Motors.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Jane Aquino. I'm with the Los Angeles Convention Center. And before you today is a request to approve a refund for General Motors Corporation. That was the result of an overpayment from their event at the Los Angeles Convention Center, which was the auto show in 2011. The refund is is basically just an overpayment from the General Motors Corporation. They overestimated their service orders, and when the event was completed and an audit was performed, then it was determined that they did pay us more than what they ordered in service.
Can you make a generous contribution to the great city of LA since they've had such a great year this year?
Yeah.
How much are we looking, how much is it?
It's 143,000,
Chump change for that.
142,352 is the amount of the refund request.
How does this process work, that exhibitors come and deposit money for that service and then balance that against the actual expenditures? Who makes the estimation in the first place, and how are they that badly off?
Well, for this particular exhibitor, what happened was that 2 years ago, they actually underestimated their orders. And so what happened was just during the show, then they had to put in additional orders, additional 11th hour service orders, and they actually did use a credit card. Apparently, General Motors does not like the events using credit cards too close to the event. And so since then, last year and this year, they tended probably to overestimate a little bit just to make sure that they will not in any way need to actually use a credit card. And at the same time, by prepaying, they actually get entitled to the discount rate, rather than if they waited and they found out they needed more orders, then we would charge them at the regular rate.
I see. Okay. Any other questions, colleagues? Questions on this one? No? Okay. Then I'll move that we approve the Convention Center's recommendation for the refund. And without objection, that will be the action of this committee. And I think that brings us to public comment. Or do we have any public comment cards? Would anybody like to submit any? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't even know what